For those who are just joining us, good morning. Welcome to the July 2023 Connect-OC Coalition meeting. We'll probably give it maybe just another minute or so for folks to hop in, and then we'll get started. All right. Well, I think it's about that time. Good morning, everyone. My name is David Pattison. Welcome to the July 2023 Connect-OC Coalition meeting. It's good to have you all with us, to see you all again. For those who are your first time and wondering about what this is and who we are, Connect-OC is a program of Partners for Wellness, funded through the Orange County Healthcare Agency and Mental Health Services Act. We're excited to have you all on. Connect-OC is focused on promoting existing mental health resources here in Orange County to youth and young adults 16 to 24. So whether you are somebody in that age range or you work with or love someone in that age range, we're excited to have you with us and to be learning a little bit more about some of the resources as well as some information, some tools that are out there for youth and young adults here in Orange County and in our broader Southern California community. As you may or may not know, we've been kind of doing a little bit of a summer series, or we're working on doing a summer series on anxiety. So last month we did social anxiety. If you missed that, I invite you to go to our website, connect-oc.org. You go to meetings, you'll see videos from the past coalition meetings. We're anticipating doing a couple of meetings on the subject of anxiety in the next couple of months. We're going to do next month intrusive thoughts and the role that that plays in our lives, as well as the kind of normalizing the experience to some extent of intrusive thoughts, the fact that we all have thoughts that pop in our head that we're not sure what to do with, or that we're not sure where they came from, and when does that become a point of clinical concern, and how can we support somebody who's experiencing some distress because of that phenomenon. We're also going to be doing something on panic attacks, probably in September, and exploring what is a panic attack and how can we help somebody who's experiencing those either in the immediate or in general move towards healing in a sense of meaningful stability and control in their lives, so they're not overwhelmed by those experiences. But today, we're very excited to say that we have Dr. Greg Matos with us from Better Love Project, and we're going to be talking about relational anxiety, something that maybe is not immediately familiar if you're thinking from a clinical perspective, but it's a real experience that youth and young adults, and frankly, that we all experience at some level. So we're going to be talking about where does that come from, what is the work that Dr. Greg and the Better Love Project are doing, the research they've done, and how does that play into the experiences of youth and young adults, and how can we utilize that information to support those who are experiencing some anxiety around relationships. First, I want to introduce the rest of the Connect-OC team, and then we're going to move in to our time with Dr. Greg from there. So, Crystal, I'll pass it off to you if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, David. Good morning, everyone. I'm Crystal Bleischer. I'm the program director with Partners for Wellness, specifically overseeing Connect-OC. Thank you again for joining us today and being a part of this conversation, and thank you, Dr. Greg, for being here to share a lot of your knowledge with us as well.
Thanks, Crystal, and we'll move on down the line. Sarah.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Chalice. I'm one of the health educators on staff with the team as well.
Sarah and Vivi.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Vivi Vu. I'm health educator in the team as well, and I'm super excited to learn more about this topic.
Thanks, Vivi. And last but not least, Camila.
Hello, my name is Camila Aro, and I'm also a health educator at Connect-OC, and I am an intern.
Thanks, Camila. That's our team. We're excited to have you all, and we would love to have you all introduce yourself as well in the chat. If you would Just let us know who you are, what brings you to the meeting. If you're with a particular organization, we'd love to know about that. And if you'd like folks to have the opportunity to contact you beyond the meeting, feel free to include contact information, either email or phone number, or whatever makes sense for you. We also would welcome later on in the meeting for you to share any kind of resources that you might have if you're with a particular organization. If you've got events or flyers for things coming up, please feel free to share those in the chat. And we also would invite you to go ahead and send those over to us at ConnectOC, and we happily will put them on our events calendar on our website. And if we can, we'll send them out in the summary email as well. I've had a couple technical issues the last couple of months. Last month, I think I was able to send out the flyers I received. A couple of months ago, I got so many flyers that my email client said, no chance, dude, that's too much. So, but all the same, we'd love to have everybody introduce yourself, and we'll get moving here. We'd also welcome you to post any questions you have for Dr. Greg as we're going through the conversation in the chat. We'll do our best to kind of come back around and get to those as well. But without further ado, unless I'm missing anything, team, I'd love to introduce Dr. Greg. So Dr. Greg, tell us about you, who you are, your background, your work, your research, and a Better Love Project.
Cheers. Yeah. Well, hey, everybody. Good morning. Happy Friday. I'm hoping everybody is ready to have an amazing weekend. I know I am. And David, thank you so much for your invitation to come here and speak about the thing that's most important to me, which is love and healthy relationships. And actually, I'm a nationally board certified couple and family psychologist now. And I do Gottman method, which is an evidence-based modality, couples therapy here in West LA. But I came to the work of love and relationships in a sort of roundabout way. Actually started what I would suggest from a place of like the exact opposite of what we think about when we think about connection and love. And that happened when I was an active duty service member. So I actually started before I became a psychologist. I was a combat veteran, and I was serving in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, the U.S. consulate in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, when I was 20 years old, and guarding the front entrance to a consulate when our consulate was attacked by Al Qaeda. And that day shaped the rest of my existence, really set me on a course and a trajectory towards psychology, because I saw the impact that experience had on me, had on my fellow Marines in the community there. And also just the entire absence of connection and love in that very violent, traumatic experience, and went back on active duty. And so my first couples case that I ever had, where I learned the power of couples therapy, which got me so passionate and interested in this work, I had on active duty. I was an active duty military psychologist. I was serving in North Carolina, where I saw my first couple. And then I was immediately hooked on couples therapy. So if there's any other couples therapists here who love the work, then you know how amazing that work can be. And I found that out, like I said, with some active duty service members. And very soon after that trajectory continued, I got off active duty. I went and I started managing the Boston Vet Center, which I think there's actually a vet center as part of the OC Coalition. But I was the director of the Boston Vet Center, working with combat veterans and their families, making sure that, we were actually offering couples therapy to veterans, which is an amazing thing. And then that's when I became board certified as well. But the thing that I realized in all of this was I was working with, and you're going to hear me talk a lot about men today. Okay. Just to let you know. And if anybody I haven't seen the movie Barbie yet, but I have to go see it. But some of this stuff that I talk about today may resonate, who knows? But I've been working with men basically for a very long time on active duty, the veterans and civilians here in my private practice and whatnot. And I came to realize, that there was a significant, when it comes to love and relationships, there's a significant challenge here, in that the communication skills, the ability to connect, there's a significant deficit and difference between the population in terms of our ability to do that. And it persists. And I'll talk about this, I'm sure, a lot more in the future. But it all brings me to, if I can, David, should I just jump in to tell you a little bit about a Better Love Project?
Please, yeah.
Okay. All right. So 2 years ago, November 2021, I founded a Better Love Project, which is a 501c3 nonprofit educational platform. And at this point, just in not even 2 years now, we've reached an audience of about 50,000 followers online. And also our content, thousands of pieces of content online on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and elsewhere, podcasts, and I'll talk more about that, have reached 5 million views, over 5 million views at this point. And I started that project with the aim of scaling up impact, because if anybody here has ever done any couples therapy or ever looked into any of that work, what might be sad for you to hear is that of the something like 600,000 divorces last year in the US, less than 40% of those couples ever even tried to go to couples therapy. And so I started the project with the idea is like, how are we going to reach all these other folks who are not even either, they don't have access, they're not thinking about it, they don't want it, they're hesitant to, all the other reasons why people might not come into couples therapy. And the good news is that we've been able to reach a lot of people, particularly through TikTok. Yay, TikTok. We'll talk about that later. But the interesting thing is that I started off the project with this idea of reaching couples, and many of the people who I've reached now include young adults and include folks who are either single, they've been single, maybe they were in relationships and they're out of relationships now, and they're trying to figure out how to become their best selves, really, to be able to love in the healthiest, fiercest way possible. And being able to deliver those skills through a Better Love Project is basically our aim. We've got a podcast called The Better Love with Dr. Greg. We're going into our 3rd season here very soon. And not only delivering some of these Gottman method skills that I've been teaching individuals and couples in my private practice work, but also just bringing people together with a shared experience online. And so it's been a huge success over the last 2 years. And it's a complete delight to be able to be here today and talk to you a little bit about some of the things that I've been writing about in Psychology Today, and some of the things that I've been working on with couples across the board and individuals across the board, that young adults for sure will want to be privy to. And the last thing I'm going to say about the last piece of a Better Love Project, where we're at right now, you may be aware of the recent notice or highlights from the Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, talking about the epidemic of loneliness that our country is facing right now. And so while a Better Love Project began with David and others with this idea or focus on couples, we've really shifted to broadening our understanding of the kind of love that we're trying to, healthy love that we're trying to foster with, hopefully millions of more people, which includes platonic love. And I might mention this later, but I just picked up this book from Dr. Marissa Franco, which is amazing. I'm super excited to jump into it. But the idea is that, we really also need to focus on love beyond just romantic relationships, but also platonic relationships. And I'm sure I'll talk a lot more about that as we go through our conversation here. But thank you so much for being here, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. That's fantastic. So maybe we can start, Dr. Greg, from there with a little bit of a high level question that kind of popped in my mind as we were talking, and then we'll obviously get into a little bit more of some of the details. But if I could put it this way, how are we loving now, and what might a better love look like?
Sure. We're not doing well right now. Okay. we're not doing well. We have a lot of challenges. We've had a lot of challenges for generations, but now we are actually being at a place where we're faced with a decision point, in my view, because of several factors, relationship trends that are occurring across the board, not only here in the United States, but overseas, and we have data to suggest that from China, Japan, and other European countries and other places. So we're not doing well. And so one of the things that I'll sort of highlight here about where anxiety might come up, for instance, is that we've got three different things that are happening, and I'm just going to briefly talk about these things as it relates to romantic relationships and relationships in general, which are basically making it folks more reluctant to engage in relationships at all, right? And so one of those things is that, and I'm going to be relatively heteronormative today. I'm going to be talking a lot about heterosexual relationships because that's a lot of where my work and my writing kind of focuses. But the first thing that's happening, particularly for young adults, when we think about love and where we're at and how we're going to do it better, we find that there's been generations now of a trend toward, particularly for young women, toward a reprioritization of what's important in their lives, particularly in young adulthood. And one of the things that has now, I believe, has solidified, right? We've arrived, we're here. There's no, and we're not going anywhere else, is that, young women, particularly young adults in college and elsewhere, have really valued, reprioritized, and have at the top of their, list here is academic success, friendship, and community, and being able to think about what is it that they're doing that are going to set them up for success moving forward, what internships, what connections, whatever. And we'll talk later on, I hope, about, where, how successful women have been at that, by the way, and being able to establish themselves in that way. So that's number one. What does that mean? That means that whereas, in general, there was a dynamic where women were investing even, at a very high level, emotionally, cognitively, and otherwise, in not only the beginning of a relationship, but sustaining romantic relationships in college, for instance. That's no longer the case. The second piece is that young men have not shifted in their priorities or their values or their skill sets to close that gap that has been created by this reprioritization, right? So that still has not happened en masse. And in fact, I would suggest, and I'll talk about more later probably, is the idea that they may not even have the skills to be able to do that in romantic relationships or in friendships, even particularly with other men. And then the third thing that I would suggest is, which is making it harder, to be able to do all this in any better way, was the pandemic. And I'm sure you've talked about this at the coalition before, but I'll mention it again today. It's just the idea that, our disruption and our rituals of emotional connection, which is a Gottman thing, by the way, but our disruption and rituals of emotional connection have, created a gap, particularly for young adults, where there's less opportunity to learn social skills, less opportunity to become more confident in these things. It leaves us all in a place where it's going to be difficult for us to actually level up our relationship skills at all, David.
Yeah. I'm wondering, well, maybe we can kind of move along the line of some of the questions that we're talking about exploring, but I'm wondering, based on some things we were just talking about, if you have a sense of, for young women, that reprioritization, right? I think there's this general sense in which relationship, whatever that relationship may be, platonic or otherwise, that connection is really one of those things that adds that meaning, that substance to life, right? That kind of gives life its flavor, those connections. But I think even beyond friendship, meaningful connection, romantic love kind of can take that to another level. Is there a sense of is there a sense of loss for young women? I'm reprioritizing. I'm focusing on these higher level goals that will help me shape my life the direction I want it to go. But is there a sense of this thing I'm leaving behind, I may not know it, but I'm missing something. And then the same thing for young men. Are they aware that there's something missing? Maybe the best way to put that.
Sure. Are they aware there's something missing? I think particularly for young men, when it comes to friendship and connection, that there's absolutely an awareness that there's something missing, in that they're, if we're thinking about college age folks, and again, I've worked at multiple college counseling centers at this point in my career, that they're aware that they're, either they're not being invited to go out and spend time with other people, or they're not making the initiative to do that, and they're spending more time alone and in their dorm and other things, which is a big challenge for a lot of folks who come through the counseling center or college counseling centers across the country. I would suggest, based on my, anecdotal at least, and from my understanding of the research at this point, that, really the level of energy and investment in academic success and community extracurriculars and the other things are actually to some degree satisfying and meeting, relational needs for young women right now. And I'm happy to talk about later the idea that, of what we understand about older, folks who are older adults, middle age, or even younger, in terms of women and how much they're rocking out at life right now. Yes.
Great. Yeah. Okay. I'm thinking too about, you touched a bit on the pandemic and the impact that had to kind of widen this gap. And so honing in on this concept of relational anxiety, or anxiety in terms of its impact on relationships. How does the pandemic, and in general, what role does anxiety play in building relationships for young adults? And also, how did the pandemic further impact that? Where did it increase anxiety within this population, and what has that meant for their ability or desire to kind of find these meaningful relationships?
Sure. So you can think about anxiety in a few different ways. You can think about it. I know you had a conversation about this, I guess, last month, but you can think about it in terms of social anxiety, which I actually am going to talk about that a little bit in the context of relational anxiety. You can think about it in context of attachment anxiety. You can in that way as well. But when it comes down to it, we're talking about, the forming new relationships requires some level of confidence. It requires some level of skill. It requires some level of initiative. And the idea, there's a few things we want young adults to be able to do. We want, an 18-year-old freshman in college to be able to introduce themselves to a new classmate in the fall semester and strike up potentially a new friendship there, regardless of how that first conversation goes. We want, a 19-year-old active duty service member to be able to ask somebody out on a first date. We want them to be able to feel comfortable doing that or know how to do that. We want a 20-year-old person who maybe has been in a relationship for 3 or 6 months. We want them to be able to communicate maybe in a deeper level and bring that relationship closer together by sharing, for instance, maybe their dream of going to law school and maybe their fear of not being able to make it. So we want folks to be able to have these skills, and we understand that all requires, again, confidence, communication, these things that anxiety is inevitably going to disrupt. And going back to, what I previously was talking about with the pandemic, if we're not actually, and it's been, it was 3 years, basically, there's lots of social isolation there. And if we were not actually having, and I'm going to specifically talk about in-person IRL interactions, then we, young adults just were not establishing those skills or the confidence around using those skills. And so the question is like, well, what do we do now? Now that we're here, what do we do with this? These deficits, these gaps that have been accelerated, I would suggest, by the pandemic. And I think there's, a few things we need to do. But what the biggest issue that I see and have written about on Psychology Today and elsewhere is that young adults, particularly young men, but young adults have, taken the path of least resistance when we've got 2 decision points, like in each of these examples that I gave about, first date, making a new friend, whatever. There's a decision point. Like what do you do? Are you going to lean into connection, or are you leaning away from connection? And unfortunately, I think the what I've seen so far is that young adults are tending to lean away from the discomfort of the nervousness of these new connections, and of, you know, a sense of avoidance is arising. So we need to counteract those things. And I think there are ways to do that for sure.
Yeah, so there's I'm hearing there's a couple sides of it, right? So there's the sense of a skill deficit that, like anybody, when stepping into any situation that requires some level of skill pertaining to that situation, if you feel like you don't have it, or you're not sure that you're confident in using them, there's going to be some anxiety involved.
Yeah. And that's totally normal.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And then the flip side of that too is, especially for somebody maybe who's just starting to utilize or learning some skills, what level of tolerance do you have for that distress and that kind of or at least that difficulty, that discomfort?
Yeah, being able to lean into it for sure. For sure.
It brings to mind something you had mentioned in one of your articles, I believe, for Psychology Today. And I'm wondering a little bit about this, especially thinking about young men, right? One of the big fears when stepping into a new relational situation where one's not sure that one has the skills, or one is maybe doesn't have a strong enough level of tolerance for the discomfort of that, is the kind of looming possibility of rejection. And I think you talked about in one of your articles that I'm trying to remember the number, but it was a high level number of women reporting that when they, even as graciously as they could figure out how to reject a young man, that many of them were receiving verbal abuse, threats in response, right? Which suggests that for that young man, he really had a pretty low level of tolerance in terms of the discomfort that came along with that. So do you have a sense of what's happening there, and how can we help young men, but young people in general, kind of build up that tolerance for the discomfort of stepping into a new relational situation?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, you know, that article specifically, I may or may not have been talking about dating apps. I write about dating apps often. That's my shtick as well. I may or may not have been talking about dating apps. One of the things that we know from dating apps actually is that there is going to be likely, because of the percentage, I mean, I can go into this, but because of the percentage of men who are on those dating apps right now, okay, which is over 60% of dating app users are men. And because dating apps are one of the primary ways in which young adults and all of us are actually initiating romantic connections these days, you can imagine that the fierceness of, particularly in heterosexual relationships, but the fierceness of competition, given the numbers, the alpha balance numbers there, are going to result in a couple of different things. Well, let me add a couple of different data points that we also know about dating apps in terms of rejection. Men are 3 times more likely to initiate contacts on the dating apps. So either, you know, swiping right on a profile, or, you know, there's multiple ways to initiate liking a profile on Hinge, for instance, whatever it's. And so the experience of men is remarkably different than most women on the dating apps. Okay, that's the bad news. And so they're getting the experience of multiple. If you can imagine a young man, let's say, and if I were coaching a client who's actively dating, I would tell them to only go on one app and not spend more than 10 or 15 minutes on these apps in a given day. But as they're using these things, you can imagine that maybe they're expressing interest in, who knows, let's say 20 potential partners on the dating app a day, if they're actually really, doing the thing. And if it's the case, which based on the fact that most times it's men initiating, and also the fact that we find that something, and this is 2017 data from Hinge, that 50% of likes from men to women are going to 25% of women on those apps. The experience of women is going to be remarkably different. So the experience of women is going to be, many women on the apps is going to be, and we got some evidence of this, of overwhelm, right? There's just like, there's so many these likes coming through, that there's a response of, potentially of like, moving away from the app, deleting the app, feeling burnt out, especially if they're actually pursuing conversations with folks on these apps. But for men, if they're swiping on like, 20 people a day or whatever, and very little response is coming back their way, positive response is coming back their way, then that, and we don't have a measure on this of the impact of this yet, but you can imagine that these are being interpreted as multiple failures or rejections, right? So there's some level of intensity around the number of perceived rejections on dating apps specifically, which we have never seen in the history of humankind yet. So, but I'm not trying to give young men any excuses here. Okay. So there is no excuse to be abusive, in which I suggest, the data suggests from my writing there, that young men are like, even after they have been told that they're not interested, they continue to either, pursue or communicate with folks on social media, if people have connected on social media, or phone, if they connect on it. So the bottom line is this: it's not going to get better for young men. And so we really do need to be able to help everyone, all young adults, particularly young men, be more effective initially in being able to connect with people at the front ends. And then, as you mentioned, to be able to tolerate rejection at the end, on the back ends.
Yeah. Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful to kind of build out, at the very least, like you said, there's no excuse for that kind of response, but to build out the context in which it's happening, right? And I think that leads to, actually points to a really great question we have from the chat, and that is, what are some recommendations to improve male emotional communication, both with males and females? So I guess in this context, and we could also frame it both in terms of seeking platonic relationships, friendships, and in terms of seeking romantic connection.
Sure. So there's a few recommendations that I'm going to make today, and they all involve, to some extent, getting likely the resources that may be available to folks here in OC through your organization and the organizations that are represented here. But brief relational counseling or coaching is one of those things. And it's not going to be the end all be all. It's not going to solve all the issues. We could quadruple the number of mental health professionals that we have who are, trained in these skills and be able to help people, and we're still not going to reach all the young adults and all the folks that need these skills. So it's not going to be the end all be all. But if we get people into individual one-on-one therapy or some kind of relational coaching, then there's a few things that can happen. Number one, there is going to be some percentage of these folks who actually have some kind of diagnosable social anxiety specifically. And to get somebody in individual therapy to be able to get them appropriately diagnosed and treated is huge. Number two, therapy is going to be able to normalize the things that we're talking about, the challenges that folks are facing right now, and actually offer some scaffolding to learn some specific skills. I'm going to suggest, two specific skills. There's many, many skills, but two specific skills that can occur in individual counseling. And that this is derived from Gottman method research and out of the Gottman Institute. And the two things that I'm going to suggest right now, skills specifically, are seeking understanding and emotionally validating. Okay. If we could, and a Better Love Project is working on it, like we want millions of people to be able to understand and know how to do this. But if we can teach young adults how to seek understanding, emotionally validate, what does that mean? I mean, when we're in conversation, being able to ask clarifying questions, being able to imagine what it is that our friend or potential romantic partner or date is actually communicating to us, to recreate that in our minds, be curious about it and authentically invested in it. Number one, huge deal. And to follow up with that, not only to be able to share our understanding about what that person is bringing up, but also share some kind of emotional validation, which is the hardest thing for most people to do, to suggest that, okay, well, it makes sense that you feel that way. Oh, I get it. Oh yeah, I get it. Those two things alone would be game changers in most relationships, beginning relationships, or the end of or decades into a relationship, regardless. And to role play. And individual therapy, you can role play, and so you can role play situations like, introducing yourself to a new friend, or asking somebody out on a date. And so these are all ways in which we might be able to tackle the thing. I've got two bigger kind of strategies that I would suggest that we all be thinking about when it comes to leveling up skills for these folks. Number one is that we as a mental health field, a helping field, we really reprioritize ourselves and elevate group therapies and skills-based group work.
Mhm.
And the biggest deal there on the group end, and I'm going to give you a few examples of groups that I think are actually really helpful, is that we're not only going to be in these groups, we're going to have these folks in groups, they're going to be practicing social skills, but also counteracting any avoidance that might be coming up from the anxiety, relational anxiety or otherwise that they have. There's three groups like I said, I want to talk about from UCLA, and I just learned about these groups recently. I was chatting with folks at the UCLA CAPS, and the three groups are in and around relationships. So there's a undergrad relationship skills group, which they're focusing on, basic communication skills, how to seek connections out in campus and out in community, how to be more effective in communicating with others. They've got a second group that's 3 weeks long, an hour each session, where they're focused on just interpersonal effectiveness, assertiveness in communication, which is huge in both friendships and romantic relationships. And the one I really, really like, particularly because I've studied masculinity and focus on men, is that they've got a masculinity or a navigating masculinity group for male identified students who are able to come to this group and really talk about, like, what are the messages that we continue to receive about what it means to be a man around intimacy, emotional connection, and closeness. And so these are all like really wonderful avenues to be able to start to address some of these skills deficits wherever they may be.
That's fantastic. It's fantastic. It's not an angle that I really had given much thought to, but it makes sense, and particularly when you're talking about, even if we could quadruple the number of mental health providers, but are there ways that we can both broaden the impact of the limited resources we do have, something like group therapy, but the flip side of that is that it also speaks to some of the other capacity to practice those skills that we're talking about. It's one thing to sit in individual therapy and practice with your therapist about how to ask somebody out, right? It's another thing to have a group of your peers who are also working on these skills, so already in a certain place of vulnerability, and then practicing that together in an environment that both allows for meaningful practice, but also has a certain measure of, for lack of a better word, safety, right? And the
Absolutely.
to relearn or redirect. As I'm practicing the skill, I'm finding myself struggling. Okay, now I have my peers and the support of the person leading the group to kind of redirect and help me better those skills.
Absolutely. But the trick is that you have to get people into these groups in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
And we know that it's very difficult to get people into groups. It's much easier to get them into individual therapy.
Right.
And so my strategy for that, I got two ideas for everybody here. Number one, which is not an old idea, but that individual therapists are actually making the group not just an option, well, maybe you could do this as a supplemental, but actually making a group part of the treatment intervention, right? So it's because you're actually going to do this stuff. And the other piece is like reaching all the thousands and millions of young adults who are not actively in therapy. And my biggest suggestion there is that if the organizations who are represented here, or mental health providers, et cetera, that they meet young adults where they're at. And where are they? They're on TikTok. Yeah. You know what I mean? They're on TikTok. They're on Snapchat. They're on Insta. They might be on YouTube. And so if you're an organization here who doesn't have a significant platform to connect with these people, my biggest recommendation is to connect with, community leaders and experts who already do have that platform and are already connected to, the young adults in OC, and to be able to get them there. And hopefully OC Connect is is doing that as well. We'll get more people on your Insta here soon.
There we go.
Yeah.
We're on Insta, we're on TikTok. I'm not the one doing.
Yeah, that's not you.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
I
yeah.
guess. All right, I got
But
you.
the rest of our team, they've got it locked down.
Okay. All right.
That actually kind of though brings up, I think I can see a kind of segue here into a question from the chat that, you know, one of the other things that sometimes can be difficult, getting people into either individual therapy, group therapy, or any kind of therapeutic modality, right? That one of the questions in our chat is, you know, I meet a lot of youth who are in the pre-contemplative stage of change. So they see no reason to change or have convinced themselves that the status quo is better. What can we do to help move them forward and thinking maybe there's something better for me and maybe there's something I can actually do about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the way I've been thinking about this particular thing is in the context of avoidance.
Mhm.
You know, so I'll just pathologize it right now. You know what I mean? But avoidance, and the two pieces that I've recently written about here is the idea that folks are turning toward, you know, social media, which is less and less actually social, and more interest based in terms of algorithms and whatnot, which is you know, in many ways can become a trap. Because folks are establishing, and this is where I think maybe that a little bit of like the status quo is okay comes in, because folks are establishing sort of paras or pseudo-social relationships on TikTok. I mean, some of these things, you know, going on live events, thousands of people just kind of, you know, listening to conversations and being involved in. And so particularly if the young adults have a high level of anxiety, this may seem like it's like the path of least resistance. So it's okay. Like it's. And then the other piece is, which is scary, by the way, and I'm going to throw it out here, is around sexual intimacy, which is that, and I've written about this as well, which is that we've got a 30-year decline of sexual intimacy for young adults. At the same time, we have a turning away from, you know, actually initiating dates that may evolve to consensual sexual relationships, and a very high utilization of pornography, to the point that we've got some above 75-80% of 18-year-olders to 40-year-olders, particularly men, who are consuming pornography on a consistent basis. And if we want to convince particularly young men that there's a better experience here to be had, we just can point to some of the more recent data that's suggesting that kind of turning inward toward technology, porn, and other things is leading to higher rates, which is very scary, higher rates of sexual dysfunction in men under the age of 30. I'm talking premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, and other things. And so if we need to motivate people, this is one thing that I would suggest we use to motivate them to turn toward real life relationships, real life connection, and building, you know, a satisfying, you know, the groundwork for a satisfying full life in the future.
Yeah, that's good. I'm wondering how many young men see and people in that context see something like using pornography as the efficient, low risk option for now, but still imagine a future where they'll be in some kind of relationship where actual sex is happening, right? Where they're actually engaged in a sexual relationship. And so I can see where that point of like, well, if this is what you're hoping for in the future at some level, then be aware that the current path is not just a useful temporary one. It actually has some negative, possible negative impacts on your hopes for the future.
Yes.
Things like sexual dysfunction. And then you also mentioned, I think, in one of your articles, in terms of sexual expectation as well, right? But what you actually think a meaningful sexual relationship is like, as shaped by a long-term pornography use.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all scary, David. We need to course correct on that.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, let's maybe. I think we talked really well. I think about we dove into the question about social media and dating apps. I really appreciate, and this is always something valuable for us, especially because we're talking to this audience, is not letting social media and dating apps and those kind of things just be scary things out there. But you've talked a little bit about the positive utilization of social media um, in terms of promoting these skills and this kind of stuff. You mentioned if you're not on social media, providers get on there and use it well, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What role has that played for you in terms of your work, your practice, and a Better Love project, kind of getting this information out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if we're able to, again, because this is where we're at, young adults are spending a considerable amount of time on Insta, TikTok primarily is the biggest generator of my audience at a Better Love Project right now. And so the idea is that if we can deliver brief, effective skills-based advice to people through video, particularly high quality video, entertaining, engaging, inspiring content, then we're going to be able to, in small ways, start to move the needle on romantic relationships and relationships in general with an audience that would otherwise, never actually get that information. And at a Better Love Project, we've helped thousands of people, either move on from abusive relationships or subpar relationships, start relationships, level up their dating skills, level up their dating app profiles. I mean, we do it all. We're really trying to help people make it happen out there because we believe in love. We believe that at the end of the day, that actually love is the most important thing. Healthy love, that's romantic love and friendship love. And we want to make sure that people understand that actually a lot of the skills that go into romantic love, we can start practicing and developing in our friendships and community. And this is particularly important, again, as we face this epidemic of loneliness, which is hitting, again, young men and men the hardest, men who never learned how to make friendships or intimacy in the first place, that we deliver these skills to these folks as quickly and effectively as possible. And so it's promising, and we're working hard at it.
Yeah, I love too thinking about it as a provider that this speaks to, not just our ethical obligation to do good clinical work, but our ethical obligations to better our community, to work in a kind of a more social sense, to move the needle forward towards better health. And as you're pointing out, love, connection, romantic, friendship, otherwise, this is a really integral part of what it is to experience a full and healthy life. Yeah.
100%. And I would suggest anybody who does individual therapy and these other things that we not get so caught up in intrapsychic things, that we are really emphasizing our clients' connection to community and friendship, and asking in some reasonable way and an encouraging way, what are our clients doing to build on, to invest, to deepen those relationships with others, knowing that, we're typically, again, particularly men, we're healthier when we're in romantic relationships. We go to the doctor more, we eat better, we have better friends, and it's not the case. There is some evidence, by the way, and we're not talking about young adults, but older, there's some evidence that women are actually happier and healthier, not in relationships. So, and are thriving, by the way, and there's large swaths of communities that are doing that. There are examples as well, by the way, of folks in singlehood rocking out at life with financial independence, good community, and friendship. And so we don't all need to be in romantic relationships, but we do all need to have the skills to be able to develop relationship in the first place.
Yeah, and we all do need connection, meaningful connection in some way, right? We all
Absolutely
need love, as it were, even if it's not romantic. So I think that's a great clarifying point, that it's not simply about the value of romantic relationship, but really about the value of connection and love, and facilitating that in whatever form it takes. So I'm wondering too, that kind of moves as we think long term about love. There's a question that speaks to you. We've talked a bit so far about the initiation of relationships, but maybe we could speak a little bit about how does fear and anxiety impact young adults' desire, willingness to be in a committed relationship, or that capacity to make those kinds of commitments?
Sure, sure. Well, we're getting less and less practice with committed relationships, primarily because of social cultural forces. The biggest one being that, our folks are entering into marriage or first marriages when they're 28, 29 versus when they're in their early 20s. So it was the case that young adults were jumping into, these very committed relationships very early on. And there wasn't a whole lot of thought going into it. I mean, that was just, and there was a lot of settling, by the way. There was a lot of relationships between people who, with people who were lacking emotional connection skills, poor communication skills, and the other things. Bottom line is, when I hear fear, when I hear that word, I think of folks who are maybe, in general, you're not going to have the urgency to get into a committed relationship or a long-term committed relationship in young adulthood in general.
Yeah.
But when we think about the idea of fear, we think about, attachment stuff, right? So we think about someone who grew up in a house with maybe unpredictable parenting, or where there's trauma or abuse, neglect and other things, and where insecure attachment has developed, whether that's anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, any one of combination of the three things. And so absolutely, if those folks who are develop those kinds of attachment styles, which is not the majority of people, even though if you're on TikTok, you think probably everybody has anxious or avoidant attachment style.
Right.
Like, I don't know. I think I have some agreement here in the room that we're hearing a lot about that. But no, most people have some relative level of a secure attachment. But if you do have those attachment styles, then yeah, you're going to be reluctant. You're going to be skeptical of investing in a relationship, and you might freak out a little bit when things get particularly serious, especially if you have a more avoidant style, which generally men do. And so, you may not actually take those steps to actually deepen a relationship. And these are all good reasons that we need to have self-awareness and do the work before we even, try to start to get into relationships. I just made a TikTok, Instagram reel yesterday saying, do all single men need to go to therapy? Yes. So we just get everybody into therapy to do the work. Then we're going to be in a better position, maybe less fear and avoidance and these other things. But it'll take all of us to encourage and motivate that kind of change for sure.
Yeah. Maybe a couple more questions. We're rounding out the hour. But first one is there's a comment in the chat I'd love to hear you speak to. And
Sure.
then kind of one last question beyond that. But the comment was young males and youth in general are struggling more with communication and vulnerability, interpersonal and platonic. I think it's a great summary of some of the things we talked about. I'd love to hear a little bit about, we've talked a bit about communication. Feel free to comment more on that if there's something else further to say, but about vulnerability, right? That's an interesting way or a different way of framing the question, not just the vulnerability of I'm taking a vulnerable step by putting myself out there, but the vulnerability within a relationship that kind of that both comes from, but also furthers that kind of emotional connection. So maybe you could comment on that a little bit.
Sure. I'll just talk about the sort of gender norms around this and just kind of what we're facing right now. So the idea is that there is a sense of confidence, enough confidence and security in ourselves and our own ability to experience vulnerable emotions, sadness, pain, fear, these other things that, that's where it starts, our capacity to do that, then to share that with somebody else with the expectation, the hope that it's going to be held, like it's going to be received well and responded to well. And so it's definitely still the case that there are general, dominant masculine, in terms of dominant masculinity when it comes to vulnerability, that we still are not doing an amazing job at providing our young men and young adults the social and emotional coaching, parents that we need in order to foster that comfort, that level of comfort with sharing vulnerable emotions with a romantic partner or even friends, particularly. That's very, very important. And so, the key there is that we need to, the good news, let me say some good news. The good news is that social emotional learning has come to many of our school districts. And so that there's a level of emotional vocabulary and emphasis on these things with a large group of students who might otherwise never have gotten this information or coaching. But that needs to be brought into the home, with parents to be able to continue that that responsivity to emotional vulnerability and safety, so that our kids can actually, it can seem more normal. That vulnerability is something that we share with one another, but it's still not the case, and it's particularly not the case for young men. Those norms persist.
Yeah. I'm appreciating the bringing in of the social emotional learning, because it will speak to the next question a bit, but it's a practical thing, right? I'm loving the good news approach, right? And for those who are attending the meeting, who are watching, especially if you are parents, especially if you are family members of maybe somebody who's not quite yet in this age range, even if they are, but maybe a little bit on the younger side, and you're wondering, how can I start building some of this with them now? We're fortunate here in Orange County that the Orange County Department of Education does a lot of work around this. So if you reach out to OCD or you reach out to your local school district, they're going to have some information for you and some material to look at, to be able to learn how to implement some of this stuff at home as well, to start building. I mean, 'cause some of the reality is, we are here focusing on youth and young adults, and that's important. But recognizing some of the challenges, there's always a value in, is the public health part of me coming out, in doing some good prevention work, right?
Mhm.
And so working to kind of say, okay, here's the challenge we're facing now. How can we start moving younger folks, setting them up now, so that as they become emerging adults, they've got what they need to be able to navigate relationships a little bit more effectively. Not, of course, leaving behind those who are already arrived and are kind of working through it. And so on that note, maybe taking a step back from, we've spoken a lot about clinical work. So maybe taking a step back from clinical work, some of the folks who are attending the meeting and some of the folks who are following what ConnectOC is doing are friends and family members and people just out in the community. We're not necessarily doing specifically clinical work. So maybe thinking about them, what can those of us working with young adults or who are in relationship with young adults do to educate and assist them with their with these issues, with these subjects?
Yeah, I think, I think it's like the 14th leadership principle in the Marine Corps. As I mentioned, I was a former sergeant in the Marine Corps, is always seek self-improvement. And so the idea here is that if we are an adult, it doesn't matter if we have children or not, if we are in a family system or not, if we're simply interacting with and in our day-to-day functioning with young adults, that it's in our ability to be able to, exemplify and practice the things that we're trying to foster in our community. And so if we're working with somebody who seems like they're really down, or they're isolating, or they're not as active and with friends as and we're seeing these things, that we actually approach the person, we talk to them about what's going on, and we share with them that that how okay it is to be going through a tough time, or maybe not being able, how hard it is to make friends, and normalizing these things. If we're parents, that we're, going back to this idea that a parent of parents, that, and there's so much pressure on parents. I mean, really, it's like, it's a big deal, but that we, the way in which we love, is essential. The model in which our kids who are coming over our house and other things see the way in which we are affectionate, right? We talk about vulnerability. That's a piece of it. To be affectionate, openly, publicly affectionate, is to be vulnerable, right? You never know. You might go for a kiss and you might not get a kiss from your wife or your husband or whatever. But to be affectionate, to show that affection, to be gentle in our communication with one another, to be inquisitive and genuinely interested in our partner or in our kid's life and listening, to ask, for instance, which I love, this is basically using a skill from Gottman method, from what we call the stress reducing conversation, but to ask maybe 3 questions of your kid on a daily basis, or friend or whatever. What was the most stressful part of your day? Well, just asking that. What are you grateful for today? What are you looking forward to tomorrow? Like actually asking these questions, having these conversations to deepen and normalize that kind of connection, that kind of intimacy with each other. All of these things are essential, and we can pull them off wherever we find ourselves in the community.
That's fantastic. For all the conversation we have about skill building and all of that, I'm loving that your response to that was model, improve, self-improvement. If you can begin to live these things yourself, it can be a witness to other people of both not only the possibility, but even the pathway of how to arrive or move towards these places of meaningful connection. And just embodying that connection in yourself, embodying that connection in the way you approach relationships. Dr. Gregg, I'll give you the floor as we wrap up, but I'm really grateful to have had you join us. I'm really grateful for the work that you're doing, and so maybe just kind of a couple of wrap up questions for you. It's just, how can folks find out more about what you're doing and stay connected to what you're doing? And then any final thoughts or words for us?
Yeah, absolutely. David, thank you again so much for inviting me today. And I appreciate being here with each and every one of you. There were a few nods and agreement. We're getting some good connection here. If you would like to come hang out with us and learn everything that I have to share about love, come find us at A Better Love Project. That's our tag everywhere on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and elsewhere. If you're into podcasts and want to listen to our podcasts, find us at A Better Love with Dr. Gregg on all major podcast platforms. Subscribe, come like our stuff, and come hang out. I teach meditation. It's one of the things that I think we need in relationships, almost daily basis, 9 a.m. Pacific time on TikTok at A Better Love Project. Anytime you see me on, come and say hi. And then I just implore each and every one of us to reconnect to the importance of love in our life and what that looks like right now and where we want it to be, and to try to show up for our values around that as best we possibly can each and every day. And I'll end on that. I hope everyone loves each other fiercely. That's a big deal to me.
I love it. Love it. Dr. Gregg, thank you. Thanks for joining. I encourage you all to keep up with what A Better Love is doing. I think there's a lot of, a couple months back, Dr. Gregg mentioned the recent note from the Surgeon General on loneliness as an epidemic. A couple months back, we included some of this information in our newsletter. It's part of what inspired us to do social anxiety as our first session on anxiety during the summer. And so I invite you all to just follow what they're doing, and let's further along this love movement.
Cheers.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dr. Gregg. We'll shift now, and I'll pass it along to my colleague Sarah for making sure I'm not doing this backwards, for any updates for us as the coalition. Do I have that in the right order? Yes.
I think you did. Yeah, you got it. Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Gregg. I caught myself really resonating with a lot of things that you said, and I was sitting here on mute, wow, that was good. Oh yeah, and I was getting really into it. So thank you so much for all that and the helpful information. It was so insightful. But yeah, a few updates on our end. We do have a few upcoming resource fairs coming up this year, and we're really busy in planning all of those. Just with many colleges, UC Irvine, Cal State Fullerton, Cypress College, Vanguard, and other things as that. So if you are interested in tabling, please let us know. We'd love to have you and see where we can get you all involved in connecting with students on campuses. Another thing, if you know any transitional age youth or young adults that are interested in being a TASTE spotlight on our newsletter, if you know someone that's done some really awesome work in the mental health field and they're in the ages of 16 and 24, we'd love to be able to highlight them and just celebrate all the work that they've been doing and their advocacy for mental health. Those are just a few updates that we have. And I'll give you all some time to give us some partner updates. So if you have updates to give, please feel free to either like raise your hand with the little emoji thing or just unmute yourself. So I will open up the floor. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thanks, Sarah. I just wanted to give a quick reminder to the group that next Wednesday at 9 a.m. we will be hosting the next Community Suicide Prevention Coalition meeting. So I want to be sure that everyone is aware of that and attending that. If you don't have the information on that meeting and you would like to attend, you can either reach out to the Connect OC team directly, and they can share that information with you, or you can reach out to the Office of Suicide Prevention. I put my email in the chat. Feel free to email me, and we will make sure that you have the information you need to attend that meeting. It will be a virtual meeting this year, or this month, sorry. But also this year, we will be having our large general meetings in person. Our next in-person meeting through the CSPC will be October, first Wednesday in October.
Sweet.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, feel free to reach out to one of us on the Connect OC staff if you'd like to be interested in joining the next one, or just email Kevin as well. I'll go ahead and let Jennifer go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I am the event manager from NAMI Orange County, and I just wanted to share that we are having our annual NAMI walks on August 26th. I'll share the flyer for that in the chat, but it is free to all participants, and I just wanted to open that up and let you guys know about that. So that's on August 26th on Saturday.
Thanks, Jennifer. We're also, Connect OC is very excited to be attending that as well.
Thanks.
Anybody else? No? All right. With that, I think we just have a few more things to go over. David, do you want to kick us off and finish us out?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, go for it.
So one last thing is, as usual, we'd love to have you all, we have a survey this time, right? I'm not mistaken about this. We'd love to have you all, we'll post a survey in the chat. We'd love to have you all fill it out as you're able. As always, for those of you who are doing this kind of work, you know this is how we continue to get meaningful feedback and continue to shape the coalition in a way that is useful, that resonates, that's meaningful for you all. So we would really value taking some time to complete the survey. It's right there in the chat. Crystal just posted it. And then the other thing I wanted to mention real quick before I forget is just a quick shout out to Amanda over at NAMI for connecting us with Dr. Greg. I know that you all have done some work together before, so Amanda's on our advisory committee, and we're grateful for connecting us with Dr. Greg. And yeah, anything else, team, before I forget or before we wrap up? I think we're good. I think we might be offering you all, as they say, the gift of time. But we're, again, grateful to Dr. Greg, grateful to Amanda for the connection, and grateful to all of you for joining us. Go enjoy the rest of your July Friday. And we will see you all back here on August 25th for our next coalition meeting. Same place, same time. And wish you all well. Be mindful of the heat. Get out there and enjoy the sun, but don't remember to stay hydrated and all that. Great. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
David and Crystal, can you hang tight for just a second?
Absolutely.